The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everyone. This is Damian Carlson with the ProfessionalVMware.com vBrownbag US edition. It is Wednesday night, September 17th, 7:30 Central. And tonight we're going to have Jonas Rosland on. He's going to be kicking off our vBrownbag DevOps series, talking about Vagrant. Before I turn things over to him, just a few quick notes. The vBrownbag is scheduled to do. Hey, Cody, is that you that hasn't muted?
I'm completely muted.
Okay. So the vBrownbag is scheduled to have our tech talks both at the OpenStack Summit in Paris, as well as VMworld EMEA. And if you're not familiar with it, tech talks are designed somewhat like TED Talks are. And the goal is to have folks come up and do 15 to 30-minute sessions, deep technical content. It's recorded. It's streamed live during the conference. And then it's also posted up to the vBrownbag YouTube playlist. So there's a ton of really cool video content out there as well, in addition to what we provide here on the podcast. So follow us on Twitter. We're at vBrownbag, hashtag vBrownbag. I'm showing the list there of the other podcasts that we run around the world. You could always go to ProfessionalVMware.com and hit the registration button for those to start getting invites to the webinar. And let's see, I also wanted to cover off real quickly on the DevOps series. John Frappier has done a fantastic job of getting folks lined up for this. And as you can see, based on this list, we've got pretty much
veritable
all-star cast. Yeah. You know, Jeff Hicks talking about PowerShell. I believe Scott Lowe is planning on covering Docker at some point. Jonas tonight is talking about Vagrant. Matt Brendan. Huh?
Yep. No, keep going. I was going to say the headliner, John Willis, is also pretty amazing. So. Yeah.
He's like pretty much Mr. DevOps guy. Jeff Hicks, Matt Brenner doing GitHub, Trevor Roberts talking about Ansible, and I believe maybe SaltStack as well. But we've got all that listed, ProfessionalVMware.com. It's right there on the menu. You can hit the DevOps series. You can see some of the videos that we did at VMworld US, specifically with John Willis and a couple others. So I'm definitely excited about it. And so anyhow, I'm going to stop rambling. So as I said earlier, I've got Jonas Rosland on tonight. He is at Virtual Swede. He's actually not Swedish at all. He's from Australia. It's pretty crazy. And so, Jonas, I'm going to make you presenter, and feel free to go from there.
Awesome. Thank you. And no, I'm not from Australia. I am from Sweden. But yes, I don't live in Sweden anymore. I live in Boston nowadays. Moved here half a year ago. So,
alrighty.
Am I presenter yet?
Yeah. Working on it. Did you get it?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh.
There we go.
Good Lord. You'd think I'd never run a podcast before.
There we go. Oh, I fixed it. Don't worry. I got it. All right. So my name is Jonas Rosland. I work for EMC. I'm a developer advocate at EMC, focusing on our open source strategy and making sure that we make some noise in the open source world. There is some traffic outside my house here. I'm very sorry about that. So I'm apologizing in advance. You heard some motorcycles before, and we'll most probably hear some sirens as well. We're in the U.S. That's what happens. If you want to contact me, it's easiest to reach me on Twitter. You'll find me there at Virtual Swede. I do a lot of blogging at purevirtual.eu, and our new team site for the developer advocate team at EMC is emccode.github.io. So this is kind of an introduction to Vagrant. Let's see.
Just real quick, I wanted to add.
Yep.
Jonas? Yeah. We definitely encourage questions. You know, if you want to tease Jonas about his country of origin or whatever, hit up at vBrownbag, hashtag vBrownbag, or feel free to send us a question within the GoToWebinar interface, or just raise your hand, etc. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so we'll cover Vagrant today. It's going to be kind of an introduction to Vagrant. So if you've never heard of Vagrant before, that's awesome. I'll teach you everything that you need to know to get started. If you've used Vagrant before, you probably will know most of what I'm talking about today, but maybe you'll learn something as well. So why should we
Hey, Jonas, we lost you.
crap on your local?
Jonas, you're cutting out.
Better?
Are you on voice or over the phone? Because there's a VoIP option and a phone option, and sometimes VoIP goes a little bit weird. But yeah, you were definitely cutting out quite a bit.
Me too. Me too.
While you're taking a look at that, huh?
What I missed?
His audio is cutting out. I'm not hearing like every other word.
I literally stepped away to put an errant child back to bed. So
you did it, Cody. Man,
it's what I get for walking away. I'm sorry, but you
correlation does equal causation.
Yep. Are you on GoTo's VoIP, or are you using Skype as we sit and record all of this random banter back and forth, figuring it out?
Me? No, I'm on the phone, not the VoIP. But I'm not sure what Jonas is using.
I'm in through Skype. I've had really good luck with that lately. So.
Right on.
Skype and a fancy headset. You would think, like 4 years ago we were just using PC speakers and microphones. That,
Oh yeah, I know. I actually have one of those blue eye snowball mics and a pop filter. I don't use it that often. I actually, I thought it would actually make the webinar sound better as far as the resulting product, but because of the way GoTo compresses the everything bejesus out of the thing, it really didn't matter. So I tried to be a pro. It just didn't work.
So I noticed when I did the recording, I think it was last week or so, that the Mac client records to records to an MP4 or something very similar. No, it records to something other than Windows Media.
There we go.
So when you re-record, so hello, are we back?
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. You sound great, actually. Awesome. Much better than before. Okay, good. I'll do this then. Okay. Yeah. So let's restart.
By the way, congratulations on using Markdown for the slides.
Thank you. It's a lot of fun.
Outstanding.
Thank you. So introduction, I think, done. We'll skip that. So what Vagrant is essentially, we want to make sure that you as a developer or someone who's just want to test stuff out
we want you to stop installing crap on your local machine. We don't want to fill your local machine, your desktop or your laptop or your server with a bunch of crap. So instead of having different versions of Apache installed in different directories or different versions of MySQL installed and you just restart them manually, we want you to stop that and instead use something like Vagrant. So Vagrant kind of takes a bold step, I would say. I'm using Vagrant because I think installing VMs are stupid. That might be a bit bold to say on the vBrownbag, but installing VMs manually is stupid. So with Vagrant, you don't have to go through manual installations. You don't have to worry about templates that may or may not work. And you don't need to maintain different versions for different virtualization platforms like VirtualBox, VMware Workstation, VMware Fusion, Hyper-V, or vSphere, and others actually. Because with Vagrant, we create something which is called boxes, and with those boxes, we can easily transform what's inside those boxes into any type, well, not any, but to many different types of hypervisors that we're using to run our VMs. So with this, we get a very easy, manageable environment instead of having one template for vSphere, one for a workstation environment, one for a Hyper-V environment, and so on. So if you're wondering if there are people who are already using Vagrant, Vagrant has put up a few names on their website, and I would say they're pretty big names, and they use Vagrant for development, but also for testing. So as you can see here, there are many big names that already use it, so why shouldn't you? Vagrant is also good if you want to run a multi-VM environment and get it up and running quickly. As I said, there are no manual installations in Vagrant. You don't do that. So with Vagrant and the Vagrant files and the boxes that we're going to get into in just a bit, we can easily run a full stack of whatever you want on your local machine. Of course, making sure that you have enough resources is a requirement before that, but otherwise you can. You can actually run an entire VMware cluster using Vagrant, so you can start up and deploy an entire VMware cluster if you want. You can also deploy a full OpenStack implementation. Mirantis has a great OpenStack implementation that where you just download essentially a few text files, run a few commands, and it downloads and installs everything for a full OpenStack implementation that you can then run locally on your laptop, desktop, or whatever.
That's actually how we did the couched OpenStack stuff, and the OpenStack cookbook that Kevin Jackson and I put out is everything is in Vagrant. It's all versioned in GitHub. It made both the podcast, like working collaboratively with the number of folks we had running the couched OpenStack stuff. So I'm going to hope that you get to the collaboration bit in a little, like how throwing Vagrant files up enables that. But it basically enabled, like Kevin Jackson and I, we're in 2 different geos, and we were able to work relatively seamlessly on the book. And then the podcast, it was like 5 or 6 of us, and we worked relatively seamlessly to deliver a really, really awesome set of podcasts. So, yeah,
that's a great example of how you can actually utilize Vagrant. Vagrant uses something called boxes. Those boxes are essentially templates that you can provision onto pretty much any hypervisor, as I said before. Those boxes, where you have an operating system installed and then you have applications installed on them, you can easily export them and send them over. They look exactly the same as when you last touched them. So anyone using those boxes are seeing exactly what you saw before you shut them down. So sharing and collaborating on a Vagrant environment is very, very easy. There are also central Vagrant box repositories, as I'll get to later on, where you can find and reuse already published images of operating systems and applications running. So with this, it's so easy to collaborate on and reuse work that has already been done. So you won't ever have to roll your own Ubuntu image or CentOS image unless you really want to. The OpenStack implementation is really cool, I would say. But other ones that are interesting as well, and I think a lot of you might want to try out, is to have, let's say, 3 web servers and a load balancer, and you want to learn how the load balancer works, and maybe fine-tune a few things before you actually implement it into production. So this is actually a good test bed as well. If you want to run what you have in production, you can set that up in Vagrant and test things out before you do changes. Other stuff to look at, I would say, are CoreOS. CoreOS is a Gen 2, a very bare bones Gen 2 distribution that is essentially there to run containers, and mainly Docker containers. And as Docker is getting more and more buzz, and the community has grown immensely the last 1.5 years since Docker was announced, I would say Docker definitely fits into this whole DevOps agenda that you have here at the vBrownbag. So if you want to try out Docker for real, I would definitely recommend you to look at the CoreOS Vagrant implementation that they have. It's really slick, it's really cool, and very easy to set up if you want to try out both CoreOS and Docker. But there are so many different examples here. I can't list them all, but there are so many different examples that you can try out here with a multi-VM environment where you can have a web server or a database server, for instance. So easy, so fun, and just get started very, very quickly. Within Vagrant, you can have packaged environments, like a full OpenStack environment if you want, where we can have stuff already installed, like Apache, MySQL, Node.js, Python libraries, Ruby libraries, Puppet, Chef, etc., where those things are already installed when you download and start to run this Vagrant box. That means that you don't have to install it. It's actually being maintained by someone else, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel there either. Same goes for distribution images for pretty much every modern distribution out there. We're looking at Ubuntu, CentOS, Fedora, Arch Linux, Debian, different BSD versions, Gen 2, OpenSUSE, CoreOS. Red Hat Enterprise Linux isn't here out of reasons, of course, because of licensing and stuff like that. And you will also not see Windows here. You can't really use Vagrant to deploy Windows boxes. It's not something that works, actually. You can, however, run Vagrant on Windows. You can run it on Mac OS X. You can run it on a Linux machine. Doesn't matter if it's a desktop or server. It works equally well. So how does Vagrant work? So Vagrant uses a text file. That's the main portion of it to actually define everything that you need to have to be able to run a so-called Vagrant box. It defines the type of box to run, either by name, using the vagrantcloud.com box names, or a URL. And that URL could be an internal URL if you or your team at work have internal boxes. It might be a public URL, and then you'll download from somewhere. It might be a Dropbox URL or an S3, or sometimes even a GitHub URL. This Vagrant file also defines hardware and software parameters that are set on the VM that we spin up using the boxes that we get. Might be amount of CPU, amount of RAM, might be if we want to use DHCP for the VM that we spin up, or if we want to set a static IP. That all depends on your choices, right? If you have some services where you want to forward a port, let's say you want to forward port 80. If you have a web service, for instance, and you want to try it out, if you want to forward that, you can do that using this Vagrant file as well. Within this Vagrant file, we also find a ton of different provisioning scripts. So we can provision applications when we boot up a bare bones Ubuntu server, for instance. We can actually pull in provisioning scripts and provisioning manifests and cookbooks, looking at Puppet, looking at Chef, looking at Ansible, or straight up bash scripts as well if you want to use that to install your stuff. So all of this and more is included in a Vagrant file. And that Vagrant file is essentially what makes Vagrant work. When you use Vagrant files and you start up a Vagrant machine, as I'll show you in a demo here soon, it immediately talks to the hypervisor that you want to use for your VM, be it VirtualBox or VMware Workstation or Fusion, Hyper-V, or vSphere. It all depends on how you define it. You can define it in the Vagrant file, or you can define it on the command line as well. So how do you get started? I know we've done some homework for this as well. I think Jonathan is reformatting that homework document right now to make sure it looks nice. Essentially, the homework for this session will be what I'm showing here, to download, install, and run a few Vagrant machines. So to get started with Vagrant, if you don't have any virtualization software on your machine today, which I'm guessing you already have, but if you don't, you can easily just download VirtualBox. If you want VMware or Fusion or something like that, you're free to use that. I'm going to use VirtualBox because that's the free and open source version here. You can also, after that, you download and install Vagrant. If you're on a Mac, you can easily use Homebrew and Homebrew Cask to install both tools on just one command line. So you see the command line there to download the latest versions that are available. So you don't have to go and visit a website, click download and open, all that jazz. So once you have that, everything's installed. You don't need to start anything. Just open up a command line. Create a directory, go into that directory, and then we'll initialize Vagrant and download a so-called base box. Once we've downloaded that base box, we can start the box, and then some magic will happen. So I'm going to show you what this looks like. Right now, I'm in a totally empty directory. I have nothing here. I'm going to do the init here. As you can see, I'm typing exactly what I wrote here. This will initialize a Vagrant file. So it creates a Vagrant file in this directory. So now we're actually ready to start this VM by doing Vagrant up. There we go.
There we go. The terminal video there for a second was not refreshing.
Let's do this a bit bigger. Is that better?
Yeah, we see progress 70%. So, yeah.
Okay, it's lagging a bit then. So what's happening here is that Vagrant talks to VirtualBox and imports the box that was downloaded previously, the Ubuntu Precise 64-bit box. It's importing that into a virtual machine and starts that virtual machine. So it's booting the VM, waiting for it to boot, giving it an address so we can actually SSH into it. It's forwarded the VM's SSH port to another port, which is then accessible outside VirtualBox here. If it's an original image, we also get some shared folders, as I'll show you in a bit as well. So the VM is up and running right now. If you were to open VirtualBox, you would actually see that you would have a running VM in it. What happened here was that when we did the Vagrant init, it actually created a Vagrant file. This Vagrant file right now has a ton of information in it. But the only thing that's not commented out is this one. Here you can see the configuration for which box we want. And that parameter is taken into Vagrant when we run Vagrant up. Vagrant up then creates the VM, imports the box that we have defined here, starts the VM,
and sets everything up. There's a ton of information here. I'm not going to go through it all. I would recommend you to look at Vagrant files later on after this session and see what you can do with it. So now, let's do this. You can see here, this is essentially what just happened. It downloaded a Ubuntu Precise box. I did that before because you got to prepare a bit, right? And it also created this Vagrant file. And this is essentially the entirety of the Vagrant file. You don't need anything else than this to actually get it up and running. You don't need the entire large file that I had. So now we can actually connect to the machine that just booted up. So let's do that as well. Just do Vagrant SSH, and it will SSH into that VM that was built using Vagrant. We didn't do any manual installation. I didn't do set any root passwords or anything like that. It just works. And within this, I can do whatever I want. I can install new packages, install software. I can do everything I want with this without installing crap on my physical machine. So this makes it very easy to have a clean development environment or a clean test environment instead of trying things out on your local machine. Within Vagrant, we also have a shared folder. That shared folder is the folder where you currently have your Vagrant file. That's a default. If you want another folder, you can point that out in the Vagrant file. If you want a shared folder for all your web servers, for instance, you can have that. But this shared folder is used to make sure that you can manage files in and out from the machine easily without having to do like SCP or FTP or something like that into the machine. Just a standard shared folder where you have access to both read and write from the virtual machine. This is actually a bit dangerous. If you're creating this Vagrant file in your home folder, this was actually in the documentation for Vagrant about a year and a half ago. If you create the Vagrant file in your home folder and then do Vagrant SSH, and then you go in and say, okay, I want to try to destroy this machine completely. You do have an rm-rf root, right? And it starts deleting everything, and it will delete your home folder as well. So don't do that. Always make a directory for Vagrant to make sure that you don't delete all the stuff that you have. But within this, so you can see here, we can actually go to the Vagrant folder, and within this, we see that we have our Vagrant file. If I wanted to create a file here, I could just do that like that. You see it there, and if I log out from the machine, you will see that that test file is there as well. So I can edit it both locally and inside the machine. So this makes it very easy for you to have like a shared web folder if you're doing some web development or shared data that you want to feed in and out of the machine. So the way you're managing your machines right now, you can see that I don't have a VirtualBox GUI open. Of course, I could use that as well to start and stop machines, but I can't use the VirtualBox GUI to actually create the machines that easily. So if you want to start or create machines that are listed in your Vagrant file, you use the command Vagrant up. If you want to stop the machine, which is to say do a proper power down or a proper shutdown, not a power off, but shutdown, you do Vagrant halt. That takes it down nice and easy. And if you want to destroy the machine, you do Vagrant destroy. It will go in and look at all the machines that have been created using the Vagrant file and destroys those machines. It doesn't destroy any other machines, just the ones you have defined in your Vagrant file. So this makes it very important as well to have your Vagrant files in different directories and make sure that you're in the right directory when you do Vagrant destroy, so you don't destroy other VMs that you didn't mean to destroy. If you want to pause the machine, there's also a command called Vagrant suspend and Vagrant resume to resume the machine. So let's do Vagrant destroy. Are you sure you want to destroy this? Yes. Delete it. If I now try to log into the VM, again, you will see that you get an error because we have to create it first. So it needs to run Vagrant up first. That's okay. Do we have any questions so far?
Well, actually, there were a few questions, but you answered those questions as you continued presenting. So
okay, good.
Does anyone else have any questions? Feel free to raise your hand, do the question thing within go to, tweet us, tweet the hashtag, etc. If not, Jonas can continue rocking it. All right, man.
Yep,
continue.
Good. So, what else can we do? Well, within this VM now, you can install whatever applications you like. If you've created, if this would be your first Vagrant machine that you have created, I would definitely recommend you to read through the Vagrant file and try out some different settings like increasing memory and CPU, add some forwarded ports for port 80 and port whatever that for the application that you install. It's very easy to do. If you do any changes in the Vagrant file on an already provisioned virtual machine, you just type the command Vagrant reload, and it will reapply the settings that you have added into the Vagrant file. So you don't have to destroy the VM to reapply the settings, just do Vagrant reload. So if you wanted to start more than just one machine, you can do that as well. I said earlier that it's very easy to have a large environment created in a Vagrant file. This is a very, very simple example of how we can do this. You can see here that we use the same box as before, but I'm defining two different VMs that I'm going to create. I'm going to call one of them web and the other one DB, and I'm going to give them each a host name called web and DB. So let's try that out. You can see here, this is exactly what you saw in the presentation. I'll save that and do Vagrant up. What happens now is that it's starting up two machines. So we're importing the base box twice into two different virtual machines. This is exactly what you will do if you wanted to set up a web server cluster and a load balancer, for instance. You would have web 01, web 02, web 03, and a load balancer. So you would most probably have four different boxes or four different VMs, maybe using the same box, but you would then deploy different types of software on top of it. So you can see here that the setting of the host name is done as well during the provisioning of the VirtualBox VM in here. So the settings here, they are the same no matter which hypervisor you're using. If you're using VirtualBox or VMware Workstation Fusion or Hyper-V or vSphere, all those settings are the same. There are a few different settings that are just for certain hypervisors. So we'll look at a vSphere example in a bit so you can see how that works as well. Now that we have two virtual machines deployed, a web and a DB, if I were to do Vagrant SSH, Vagrant wouldn't know which one I want to connect to. So we need to tell it which one we want to connect to. So I want to connect to the web server first. I can do that, and you'll see here that the host name is set. It's a totally different machine here. we can see yeah, that's not going to matter. We'll connect to the DB as well, and you will see we have another hostname there. So this way you can have 2 virtual machines up and running within, what did it take? About a minute? Instead of having to do manual installations or look for the kind of latest template, maybe you can find it. But this way you can just have VMs up and running within minutes. Same thing as we talked about earlier with larger environments like the OpenStack environment. It will definitely take longer than just a few minutes, but it's way faster than if you were doing it manually. If you're using multiple boxes here, or multiple VMs rather, you can connect to a web machine, to the web machine in the example using Vagrant SSH Web. If you want to destroy just that machine, you can do Vagrant destroy web. Or if you want to start or create or recreate the web machine, you just do Vagrant up web. I'm going to show you what that looks like as well. Are you sure you want to destroy the web VM? Yes, destroy it. So it forces a shutdown, destroying it, and yeah, kind of ruins everything, right? Now we can do Vagrant up web if we want to say we just want to handle that one, or we can do Vagrant up as well, and Vagrant will then go and look and say, okay, we have the database already, but I'm going to deploy the web server because the web server isn't there. So it's not redeploying the database server because that's already existing. So Vagrant up is a pretty safe way of making sure that you have the correct environment that's in your Vagrant file. Just wait until that completes there.
So I remember the first time I saw Vagrant, I was talking to Cody about DevStack, and Cody told me, he said that he had a Vagrant file that'll set up OpenStack.
Yeah.
You know, just like full automated. And so I went out to the Open Virtualization website that Cody did a lot of OpenStack things on. I grabbed the Vagrant file, did the stuff, did Vagrant up, and then I was just completely blown away. I was like, wow, that is amazing. It is freaking magic.
Yeah,
I've just never seen anything like that before. Yeah, it's really cool.
It definitely is.
It certainly takes a whole lot of the tedium out of it.
Yeah, it makes it fun to actually deploy servers. It's not boring and tedious work anymore. You can actually sit and watch as they are deployed because it's that fast. As you saw here, it takes less than a minute to start up 2 new VMs. That's just crazy fast, and set the host names and everything as well. And other stuff if you wanted to add that, because you can provision software using Puppet, Chef, Ansible, Bash scripts, and so on. So we've just used a Ubuntu Precise box here. There are a number of different boxes out there. I mentioned all the different distributions before. Well, not all of them because there are too many to list in a PowerPoint. But there are a ton of them up on vagrantcloud.com, which is kind of the new and fancy site for official Vagrant boxes. There's also community-supported boxes up at vagrantbox.es, and you can create your own box if you want to roll your own. You can do that using a really cool tool called Packer. I've been using Packer for a while. I really like it when I want to roll my own images. You can even create an ESXi, a vSphere ESXi box using Packer. It's very simple. There's a great documentation up on it if you up on their website if you want to try it out as well. So what about vSphere? Well, with vSphere, we can actually create VMs using Vagrant as well. So you can use Vagrant to deploy to your vSphere environment. So if you have a Vagrant box like the Precise 64 box here, you say, okay, this is my box here. This is the name of it. Just, right now it's just named dummy, right? You look at the, you input your host name, your compute resource, your resource pools, template name, VM name, VMware user, and VMware password, run Vagrant up, provider vSphere, and it will go off, talk to that vSphere host, and actually deploy the VM itself. Has anyone tried this one out there?
No, I haven't, because I don't have the provider for it. But anybody else? Or Cody, have you tried it? Cody is easily distracted sometimes. So it's probably
apparently.
Like a fluffy-tailed dog or a squirrel or something.
Okay, so I would take this as a challenge for everyone who's listening. If you have a vSphere environment, and since you're listening to vBrownbag, I would guess you probably have a lab environment or a work environment. I would challenge you to actually go and try this out in your vSphere environment. So you don't have to rely on just VMware templates anymore or vApps. You can actually just download new boxes, create your own boxes on your laptop, and just push them to a VMware environment. Because I think this is really cool. This is one of the few tools that I know of that can actually provision to multiple different hypervisors by just pushing out or running a small command. I think it's extremely powerful for you to have the same environment, the same box, actually working on numerous hypervisors. We know that a lot of customers out there are using multiple hypervisors. We know that not everyone have a VMware Workstation license that they want to use on their home PCs, for instance. They can easily use VirtualBox or some other virtualization technology, but still use the same boxes that are being used in production or being used in dev and test at work. So I would say this is extremely powerful and really easy and fun to get into, and I would recommend everyone to try it out if you have a vSphere environment. So some links for you to read up on more about Vagrant. It's vagrantup.com, where you will find all the documentation. The documentation is lacking a bit every now and then, but for the most part, unless you really want to dig deep into some really advanced topics, they cover most of it on Vagrant Up. If you want to download VirtualBox, you find it at virtualbox.org. If you want to try out Packer, which is an awesome packing tool for creating your own boxes, go to packer.io. And if you want to have a look at the Vagrant vSphere connection, go to github.com/nsidc/vagrant-vSphere. And you'll find all the information there, some examples, and all the code that you need to actually connect your Vagrant environment over to a vSphere environment. All right.
So that Vagrant vSphere provider on GitHub, that doesn't require the $79 provider that you get on Vagrant's website?
As far as I know, I have no idea.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'm looking at it now. I always thought that you had to get the provider, and this looks like you don't need to buy that. It doesn't.
I think the $79 is just for the workstation infusion.
Okay. Huh. That's interesting. Cool.
So yeah, as I said, I would recommend anyone to try out Vagrant. This is a Vagrant 101, very, very basic, because there are a ton of stuff that you can do with Vagrant. Could you tell us a bit more about the OpenStack environment that you built out with Vagrant and how it works?
Cody, are you there? Or are you asking me, Jonas?
Yeah, anyone that can
answer. What are we asking,
it.
Cody? Sorry, what I'm going to miss? What's the question?
I was wondering if you could talk a bit about the OpenStack environment that you built out using Vagrant.
Oh, so the stuff we built out using Vagrant, which for the OpenStack cookbook is at github.com/OpenStack cookbook/OpenStack cookbook is the actual repo. We released it for Grizzly. So Kevin Jackson is the original author of the OpenStack cookbook on Pact Publishing. There wasn't Vagrant when we set out to, or there wasn't Vagrant, or it wasn't as popular when he set out to do this with Essex. It wasn't just like it wasn't as interesting then as it is now. When he decided that he was going to join Rackspace, I kind of pushed him into updating the book to a Grizzly or whatever release. We were actually targeting Folsom, but we missed the boat on that, right? And so we needed to figure out a way to work together, and he's like, well, so I'm like, all right, well, we need to use Vagrant, and we need to be checking things into GitHub. So anytime he would make a change during his UK hours or so on, I would have the most fresh, up-to-date version of whatever he was working on when I would pick up and start writing the book that evening. This got really interesting as a lot of the OpenStack projects are very codependent on one another. So like he would get Keystone up and working, and then I would have to figure out, well, okay, to get Swift up and working, I first have to have Keystone up and working. Did he finish this? Let me check out the most recent changes and so on. And then we've also worked very collaboratively back and forth to keep the repos up to date. It's at this point it's all Bash scripts. The gist of that is we didn't want to choose your DevOps backend for you, right? Like we could do it in Ansible, we could do it in Puppet, we could do it in Chef, but we wanted to show, you know, these are the manual steps you would do it, and because I really don't want to follow the manual steps every time I go to write a chapter, we're going to go ahead and bundle it all up in Vagrant so that you can follow along at home. It's also helped tremendously with correcting little erratas that pop up in the book as well. So,
so I think that this is a great example of how you can actually work together with Vagrant, because as you said there, you were working in different time zones, which meant that you can work together all the time, right? So you had to pick up where he left off and vice versa.
It also gets rid of the, well, it worked in my environment problem, right? So he was not doing anything different than I was doing and vice versa because we were all working from the same set of, the same Vagrant file, the same set of Bash scripts to install things and so on. So it wasn't, you know, the only deviation toward the end is I switched over to the Fusion plugin to make things work, at least for my personal workflow. But it still worked across the board, right?
Yeah, I think it's a great example of how you can do powerful collaboration using this, because it's just text files. It's simple to read text files,
and Vagrant is super configurable. So we have 4 or 5 different VMs in there, and we tune each one for memory. So the controller doesn't need all that much memory once it's stood up, whereas a compute node, we can give it 3 gigs of memory. And all from that same base box, based on the node name in that multi-image Vagrant file, things would come up. And then because it's the little sub-language of things that you use to configure a Vagrant file is very Ruby-ish. In fact, you can actually use like straight Ruby in it. So we put all the host names into a hash file, and that's how we configured IP addresses to get them consistent across environments. Because what was happening is at first, my stuff would end up in whatever networks that my Fusion or my VirtualBox decided that was available on my box, right? And a lot of these will randomly choose them for you. And so we started statically configuring networks in there and so on. So it also took us from like 800 lines in a Vagrant file down to a much more manageable size. So,
yeah.
And then when we did the stuff for the OpenStack brown bags, as we started getting into the homework and whatnot, I could release Vagrant files that were a week late on the homework or so. So like if the homework was install Swift so that we could go over everything in class, well, I already had a Vagrant file ready, or a set of provisioning scripts ready to go. I would just check them into Git before the show, so if anyone hadn't solved the homework at that point, they could still follow along with what we were doing.
That's awesome.
And then we actually, toward the end, ran into some issues with Neutron, and the little community that built up around the OpenStack podcasts was like, hey, I'm going to check this out of your, like, I'm going to fork this on GitHub, I'm going to solve the problem, and then, you know, like, you can test out and merge the changes. And it was just very, very, very fun, very interesting experience. And it's not, like, being a server infrastructure guy, that's not a way I'm used to working. You know, like, well, if the server doesn't work, what do? I go back out, like I log into the DRAC, I attach the ISO through this crazy Java thing, and I wait 6 hours while it reboots, and right. And then even doing it in VMs, like, well, unless you had gold images or you kept templates around on your laptop, you were still like, okay, well, you learn how to install Ubuntu very, very, very quickly, like, or ESXi, like F11, F11, F8, F11, right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure that that's the right key sequence, but that feels right.
Yes, something like that. Input root password here. Yeah.
Yep.
I think it's a great example. Thank you so much, Cody, for sharing it here.
No worries.
I see there's one question. I don't know. I don't think it was answered here. This sounds like Docker for servers. Not really. but yes. Vagrant is essentially packaged distributions, so packaged operating systems. Those packaged distributions will run as virtual machines, not as containers. So I would say the Vagrant file might have been a precursor to the Docker files that we have right now for Docker, but they're not the same, no, but they're similar.
And to confuse things further, you can actually use Docker as a provider for Vagrant. So you can do, once you install the Docker plugin, you can do vagrant up -- provider equals Docker. Yeah. And instead of firing up a VM, it'll fire you up a Docker container. Yeah. So really what Vagrant lets you do is rapidly prototype different server configurations or different install options, or like it lets you set up a working environment or a development environment that can then be shared and checked into your version control just the same as, you know, so if you have multiple people developing an app, or if you have a way you deploy WordPress, or a way you deploy whatever the CRM flavor of the week is, you know, you codify that in either Bash scripts or Chef or Puppet, and you can actually rapidly test locally on your box, right? If you're developing net new apps or working in an environment where they develop net new apps, you can work with Vagrant to provide, and this is where the DevOps part, or the ops part of DevOps comes in, is if ops has a way, security policies and so on, they want boxes deployed, you can codify that into a Vagrant file and a Chef environment, or a Vagrant file and some Ansible stuff, or however you feel like doing it, and then handing that over, because it's all text files, you check it into version control, and your developers can all work from the same playbook. So you don't lose the, okay, well, it worked in dev, now it's ops problem, right?
Yeah.
Everyone has tested and worked to the same thing. And then should ops have a policy change or something of that nature, they can change up the environment, right? If you're moving from 1204 to 1404, or if you're moving from CentOS to straight up RHEL, or moving into SUSE or whatever, right? All of these things, you codify the changes, you test them out using whatever your DevOps tool or your config management tool of choice. Vagrant lets you run that locally, test it locally, and then hand it to other people in your environment in a way that they can readily repeat. You know, how many times have you ended up in a situation where you set something up and you want it to work a very certain way, and then, well, whoever's developing the app, you then get their code and you're like, okay, well, I put the jar in the Tomcat directory, but it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right. Well, these libraries aren't there. What do you mean these libraries? What libraries are you looking for? Right. So.
Yeah, exactly. I think Vagrant is a great way of getting, as you said before, quick prototypes up and running. But you can also use it to actually provision everything from dev, test, QA over to production, because you're using the same things. You're using the same boxes, the same configurations. It makes it so much easier for IT teams to work together. It's a DevOps tool, essentially.
Or even just a collaboration, communication kind of tool. And then even if you're not doing DevOps, right, this lets you do, like, not everyone's got a budget for a massive lab environment or a massive POC environment or something of that nature, right?
Yeah.
So you set it up this way, and you codify all of your lessons learned into whatever your config management tool of choice is. Like, Bash is really, really handy for getting things up and running quickly. So you write the Bash script, you have it apt-get install things, you put the config files where they belong, and then when it comes time to go production with a particular tool, or you're working with support on something and they're like, well, how did you deploy this? And, well, because we've got government clearances and all, I can't actually let you WebEx into this environment. I'm sorry. And, you can actually eliminate hours upon hours upon hours of troubleshooting by just providing here's the Vagrant file in a private GitHub repo, we're under FriendDA kind of thing. Let's make this work, right? So it allows you to collaborate more than just with your developers. You can collaborate even in between ops groups, or as you start to evolve a new version. Say you're deploying a new version of vSphere or a new version of OpenStack or a new version of whatever, you try it out here first, and then as you learn these lessons, heck, Vagrant has providers for just about everything. You can even retarget Vagrant to bare metal, right? So there's a Vagrant bare metal now this is where things get weird. Like, it assumes you already have a full operating system on there, but it'll install SSH keys and run scripts or install the chef agents or whatever you need to handle that for you. So there's a whole slew of plugins that make things really, really handy.
Yeah, it's extremely powerful, and I think everyone who listens will see that they have a use for this, maybe even a need. And I'm really hoping that you all try this out, because it's a great tool both for personal development if you want to try things out, but also for professional development, as Cody has said here, both for collaboration but also for helping IT teams actually work together better. Do we have any other questions, or are we?
The Twitter has been surprisingly quiet.
Everyone's taking notes.
Yeah, well, they're actually probably just busy watching Dubstep Cat. So I thought I'd tweet it out again. Dubstep Cat is pretty awesome, by the way.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. I'm not seeing anything on the hashtag or in the account or on GoTo. So yeah, it looks like we're golden.
Awesome. Thank you so much for letting me on and ramble around for about an hour. It's been awesome. And thank you all for listening. And if you have any questions or anything like that, just reach out to me on Twitter at VirtualSuite.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jonas. I sincerely appreciate it. And thank you, Cody.
No worries. Thank you, guys.
All right, everyone. Thanks again. We'll see you next Wednesday, September the 24th at 7:30 Central. Have a good evening.